My connection to this book is started in 1979 when I was a waiter at the Hamburg, and I'll get to that when I read my piece a bit later. Presently, I'm a substitute teacher in the elementary schools of Iowa City and local activist, occasionally in the paper. Now, Mary Beth truly shocked me with this book. I had absolutely no idea it was going to be this great. She had asked me to contribute something, and I was substitute teaching, and I was tired, and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And then I finally emailed her in October, and I said, by the way, when's the deadline? And she said, 2 days from now. So I had to hurry up and write something. And then it was because I hadn't believed that she could put this thing together like this, quite frankly. And then when it came out, I was totally in awe. I mean, this is an incredible book, truly. A great work of art. She received an MFA in art from Iowa. And the previous book, which she did, was Small But Ours, Images and Stories from a 19th century Bohemian neighborhood. And by that, she doesn't mean the East Village in New York, the north side of Iowa City. And she worked as a hostess at the Burg in 2008 to become more a part of the community and less isolated as an artist. And I think and Mary Beth, unless you want to say some words now, we'll just continue right on. If you do, come up to the microphone. Wait till you hit the mic.
I'm not going to read today. I just wanted to thank you all for coming on this very warm and at the end of the festival day. It's very nice to see you all. And to thank Carol Kirsch and Mary Bennett for inviting all of us here today, those of us that are reading. And I want to thank the readers themselves for coming and giving their time, and all those that contributed to the book. And lastly to Gary, who it becomes more and more apparent to me that if he hadn't been involved, the book would have been in 72 boxes in my studio, and there would be nobody here today. He took over the marketing of the book, and what better gift can you give to somebody that's, doing this kind of thing? So thanks to Gary. And Gary's going to be introducing the readers, so thank you.
Okay, our first reader is Hope Edelman, a graduate of the Iowa Nonfiction Writing Program, author of 6 nonfiction books, including the internationally acclaimed and best-selling Motherless Daughters. She lives in Los Angeles, teaches at Antioch University, Los Angeles, and teaches writing here at the Summer Writing Festival. Please welcome Hope Edelman. It's a pleasure to have you here, Hope.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you all for being here today. When Mary Beth contacted me a little bit more than a year ago asking if I'd like to write up something about the Hamburg Inn, my immediate response was yes, because it was and remains my favorite eating establishment in Iowa City. But I thought it was going to be like a little anthology about this big with about 12 or 15 short pieces in it. And then one day in my mailbox arrived this stunning book of photographs and memories with 4-color pictures. It's just such a beautiful work. I hope that those of you who don't yet own it will choose to buy it today, because it's really a treasure and so wonderful to have. I lived in Iowa City from 1989 to 1992 when I was in the nonfiction writing program under the leadership of Carl Klaus. And I started coming back every summer in 1995 to teach in the writing workshop. And now I bring my 2 daughters with me every summer, so it's like second generation Hamburg Inn. When we get to town, one of the first things they usually want to do is go have a meal at the Hamburg Inn. So I wrote a short piece that's set back in the years when I first lived here, but I just as easily could have written a more contemporary one because we go there all the time still. So I'm sure I'll see some of you there now that we all know each other. There's no title. It's just called Hope Edelman. So I'll dive right in. The mugs made all the difference. White and ceramic, chunky and substantial. They were the kind of mugs that said hot coffee, serious coffee, right here, right now. In 1992, you could find similar mugs at the Great Midwestern Coffee House on Washington Street, but you also ran the risk of seeing your recently ex-boyfriend there with his shockingly new girlfriend. So not always the best idea. The Cottage on Lynn Street was another option, but it closed after lunch. The Hamburg Inn was a straight shot down Market Street from the ancient blue brick building where I lived, so the Burg became my destination when I needed someplace outside the house to work. The writers didn't go there, and you could eat your egg salad sandwich without interruption and pretend that the guy you thought you'd love didn't have a shockingly new girlfriend, or that he didn't even exist. Plus, those mugs. This was long before Wi-Fi, even before laptops. Writers in coffee shops still had to use paper, a method that seems both quaintly archaic and vaguely ridiculous now. I would sit at the side tables at the Hamburg Inn back against the wall and sketch out personal essays on yellow legal pads with black fine-tip pens. I could nurse a thick white mug of coffee for well more than an hour before any of the waitstaff noticed I was still there. Sometimes slow service had its benefits. Sorry, waiters. If I needed to procrastinate, I brought my bills and paid them at the table, or I read books and highlighted them with fat yellow markers. Then I walked the 5 blocks home and finished the night writing on an IBM desktop with 2 floppy drives. The nonfiction writing program was a fledgling program back then, very much in the shadow of the writer's workshop, and creative nonfiction is still a genre in search of a definition. Creative nonfiction? Isn't that an oxymoron? My workshop friends would ask. The NWP hadn't yet been accredited for an MFA. Instead, we all got something called an MAW in English, though nobody really knew what that meant. Not that it mattered. We wanted to write about events that had really happened and the impressions they'd made on us. That's what we were there for. We just wrote. In the spring of 1992, I sold a book proposal for a nonfiction book about early mother loss and its lifelong effects on women. My mother had died of cancer when I was 17, and I'd been looking for a book on the subject for the past 10 years. Finally, I decided to write it myself, working on the proposal and sample chapter at the side tables in the Burg on and off for 8 months. The sale meant, well, it meant everything. It meant I could pay my final semester's tuition and graduate on time, that I could move to New York with 2 of my workshop friends, and that I could support myself as a writer for at least the coming year. My last weekend in Iowa City, bicycles sold, houseplants relocated, refrigerator emptied and scrubbed clean, I ate a final breakfast at the Hamburg Inn. The side tables were all taken on a Sunday morning, so I sat at the counter instead. The waiter placed a thick white mug of coffee in front of me. I looked at it as if I were saying goodbye to an old friend. Midway through my omelet, I felt another customer's eyes on me. 2 stools away, a man was staring at me with an expression of pure sadness and longing. He was middle-aged, shirt sleeves and jeans, could have used a shave. The staring went on for 5 minutes or more. I'll be honest, it was creepy. I finished my breakfast and hurried to pay the bill. Standing at the cash register, I felt a tapping on my shoulder. It was him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I hope I didn't bother you. But 10 years ago, I lost my daughter, and you look so much like she'd look as an adult. Thank you for letting me look at you." I hadn't seen that one coming, and I believed him. Anyone who's lost a loved one knows how grief can make you wish for things that aren't there and can never be. I would think of this man often in the coming year. Every time a motherless woman told me a story about seeing her mother's face in a crowded shopping mall, or following a stranger for half an hour on a city street just to feel, even if only for a short while, that she was in the presence of the person she most wanted to be with. I would sit in living rooms in New York City and cafes in San Francisco and backyards in Chicago suburbs and listen to these stories, and they'd all transport me back to Iowa City, onto a round stool at the corner of the Hamburg Inn, letting a stranger stare at me for a few minutes longer to believe in something he couldn't otherwise have. "It's all right," I told the man at the cash register. "I understand, really." A few hours later, I got into the U-Haul with 2 fiction writers from the workshop and started heading east on I-80. It wasn't the kind of farewell from Iowa City I might have written for myself, but it was a better send-off than I could have imagined. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hope. Our next reader is going to be Dave Maurice. writer, educator, artist, earned his MFA here in '72, known to many as Dr. Alphabet. He's written a lot of poetry when sitting at the Burg, and the end paper poems that appear in the book were written during one of his Poetry City marathons performed at the Burg 2 years ago. Dr. Alphabet.
I usually wear an alphabet hat and a coat with Scrabble tiles all over it, but it's a hot day today and that wouldn't do. So instead I wore this t-shirt. After I get done reading, I'm going to walk around and I'll take up a collection. You can put every poem of this series that I did begins with the title, At Hamburg Inn. At Hamburg Inn, I am snapping word pictures with my poetry camera. At Hamburg Inn, just eggs are on the breakfast menu. They come with just bacon, just toast, just hash browns, just orange juice, and just about anything else you want. They're just delicious. At Hamburg Inn, let's begin with the burger of truth and the fries of logic. At Hamburg Inn, a man reads the newspaper and a woman reads the menu, while their young daughter reads the Brothers Karamazov. You have to have manners to go to the Hamburg Inn, and this poem tells the best way to have manners at the Burg. The waitress brought me my breakfast plate and sat it on the table. I said, as kindly as I could, "Why, thank you, Mabel." "No, no," she said in sugary tones, like honey poured in tea, and chirped with emphasis, "Thank you for thanking me." Ah, maple syrup is far less sweet, so what else could I do? I said, "Thank you for thanking me for thanking you." Then Mabel's voice went sweet and low. "No, no, thank you," said she, "for thanking me for thanking you for thanking me." Is that my phone? At the Hamburg Inn, there's a counter. 35, 36, 37. Thank you, counter. At Hamburg Inn, a mirror reflects on itself. At Hamburg Inn, Bill Clinton sat at that table and ate that burger and won the presidency. At Hamburg Inn, the clock on the wall doesn't tick, it talks. It talks to anyone who will listen. At Hamburg Inn, the hamburgers dance on the grill to the music of the fries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alphabet. Our next reader really needs no introduction in this community. Was that a big enough boost there? Larry Baker is the author of 4 novels, including Flamingo Rising, which was made into a Hallmark movie, His most recent novel is Love and Other Delusions. And, of course, he is also a former Iowa City Councilman, which most of you do not know, however, is he is one of the world's greatest raconteurs. Larry Baker.
See, the difference is I can look at this crowd and about half the people here are saying, who in the hell is this? I have no idea who this guy is. Thank you, Gary. And Mary Beth, thank you for asking me to be included in this. When Mary Beth called me, she wanted to do a book originally, as I recall, about the Hamburg Inn and writers in Iowa City. And how did the Hamburg Inn fit into your writing experience and writing career? I envy people who can write in public or think in public like that. I can't do it. So I didn't have an angle on the Hamburg Inn from that perspective. I mean, when somebody does a history of St. Mary's Church, I can talk about all the great story ideas I get there as I'm sitting there halfway paying attention while my wife is praying for me at the same time. So I took the approach of, what do I remember about the Hamburg Inn? What will I remember about the Hamburg Inn? And I start with a simple question. Am I an old-timer in Iowa City? I've been here almost 30 years, but I've only known the Hamburg Inn since it moved to its current Lynn Street location. I can remember the first meal there, my first meal there. I knew it was my first because I was specifically told to go there for the hamburger and fries. My source, which wasn't Gary. For years, I thought it was Gary, who has been here longer than I have. My source did not mention the ambiance, nor did he give me any history. You want a good burger, you got to go there. That's all. And I kept going back. Over time, I settled into a basic routine, into a basic menu. The burger was a constant, and then I started eating breakfast there too. Always an omelet, and Wednesdays were a special day because, as I recall, that was fried chicken day. Now, it may have been Thursday. See, part of the problem of getting to a certain point is your memory's not even reliable anymore, nor are your eyes, because everybody else is reading from the book. I had to print out this essay in 24-point font so I can read it. Can't quite hear me in the back. Well, that'd be the first time. All right. Thursdays were a special day, the fried chicken dinner. Hamburgers, eggs, and fried chicken. You did not go to the Burg for exotic food. And you could usually expect to stand up if you went anytime right at dinner time. Was it the best food in Iowa City? No. I mean, the old Pearson's drugstore had great shakes. Individually, you could find little things here and there, other places, but the Burg was not just a food destination. It was as much a social destination. It was an odd melting pot of types in a college town. Artist and anti-establishment, long hair and tattooed diners, and that was before piercing became a fad. University staff and faculty, too. Eating there was like buying a Volvo, part of the image. But also the world of Norman Rockwell and Ronald Reagan. Blonde and ponytail sorority girls, but never dressed for a date. No, these were social club young men and women up too early in the morning after a night of partying. Casual clothes thrown on by those puffy-eyed kids who just wanted breakfast and enough caffeine to jolt them into a new day, probably being served by a goth waitress who was twice as smart as they were. Most college towns have their own version of the Hamburg Inn, some example of an older, more individual America. No uniforms on the staff there. You could see and hear the kitchen. Blue plate specials, and after a while, especially with those who came to the college town for school but stayed for other reasons, a place like the Hamburg Inn becomes an inorganic form of comfort food. Part of your past, idealized and returned to, and as you sit down in a booth or at the counter, you inhale the memory, the aroma of your own memory. Thank you.
Oh, you're done. Okay. All right. Our next reader is Dan Daly, a retired librarian and currently gardener, bibliophile, and I know that for a fact because he's helped me through tons of my used books over the years, and I do mean tons, and a great community volunteer. He was born and raised in Iowa City, and he's enjoyed eating at the Burg for 50 years, as well as celebrating St. Patrick's Day every year without fail. Dan Daly.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Mary. As Gary pointed out, I was born and raised here in Iowa City, and when I was growing up, my late father, who was an electrical contractor in Crown Electric with Fred Hanrahan, whenever we were doing a job that was close enough to the Hamburg Inn, we went there for our breaks, at 10 o'clock and maybe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I used to love that. I'd started working for him when I was still just a fresh teenager. And sometime during those years, I made my transition from hot chocolate on some cold winter morning to coffee. Anyway, I was pleasantly surprised to find myself included in your book. I'd entered this contest that celebrated the 60th anniversary of the Hamburg Inn and submitted a poem, not thinking of it again until, whoa, there it is. So here's a little bit of doggerel. Ode on a Grecian Spoon. How do I love thee, Hamburg Inn, too? So much to list, let me begin to. Thou pedigree of griddle and slow food, galleons could sail on the Java you've brewed. I love your Belgian waffle and chocolate chip hot cake. I love your healthy garden salad and your decadent pie shake. Your tenderloins, burgers, chicken, fish, an omelet called Zadar. Thank heavens for little girls like yours and even your radar. After church crowds, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, pagan, political players, Obama to Reagan. Like panthers, the waitstaff is both agile and swift. Like artists, the cooks show their culinary gift. I learned to like coffee on Hamburg Inn stools. It's still a great place to recharge biofuels. 60 years you have graced your North Side number 2 venue. 60 more grant us all, please, to drool over the menu.
Well, as you can see, I've changed into my apron, and I don't know if the cameras can catch it, but this is truly an apron I wore from '79 to '81, and amazingly enough, I unearthed it in my apartment, which has barely passed the rental inspection every 3 years, and I mean barely. And at that time, we were required to wear white shirts and white aprons. And me being just a little bit of a rebel, I photocopied scenes, artistic scenes or historical scenes on my aprons. And this one, of course, is Nighthawks by Edward Hopper. And anyway, this is my favorite apron. And the grease is still all original, I guarantee it. I'm gonna read sort of a combination of my two pieces. The first one which is called A Restaurant with a Soul in the book, is up on the wall of the Hamburg when you first come in. And there's also a picture of me a couple tables down from when I was working there, but you probably won't recognize me. Same glasses, a lot less hair, but basically the same glasses. And it was also another shock to me from Mary Beth, aside from the fact how great this book was that she told me that reading my piece from the Press Citizen, Restaurant with a Soul from 1990, was what inspired her to do this book. And I'm still sort of shocked about that, way shocked. So I will have to take off my glasses, Larry, for this part of the reading. And I'm going to start with what's in the book. In April 1979, a short, scruffy-looking guy came into Hamburg Inn looking for a job. He was not particularly optimistic about his chances. He'd been unemployed since he arrived in Iowa City the previous November. And earlier that morning, he'd walked out of Maid-Rite after glancing at their 6-page application. 6 pages for a waiter's job? Even in the most educated city in the United States, that was a bit much. Maybe it was time to forget about Iowa City and go back to Michigan. But first, I'd try the Burg. If they didn't hire me, at least I'd get a decent cup of coffee and read a stray newspaper. I asked the waitress about a job, and she said, "Dave's in back," and ushered me into a very cluttered little room surrounded by shelves filled with huge cans of ketchup and large cardboard boxes labeled paper cups and napkins. The smell of grilled hamburgers permeated every nook and cranny. A man of about 30 with thinning sandy-colored hair sat at a small, cleared-off area. He appeared to be going over the books. "You ever been a waiter before?" he asked. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, back in Detroit a few years ago." He peered at me for a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds. "All right, well, come in tonight at 6 p.m. and we'll try you out." That was it. No interview, no 6-page application, didn't even get my name, Just the basic question, can you do the job? When I left Hamburg Inn that morning, I wondered if I could survive my dinner hour trial. 2 years later, I served my last burger and fries. And except for the chicken grease clogging my sinuses on Sundays and Thursdays, and only one very obnoxious, demanding customer, it was a great experience. When I started working there, I had no friends in Iowa City, and 2 years later, I knew waitresses, cooks, teachers, doctors, carpenters, salesmen, postal workers, and artists. I was part of the community. And Dave was the kind of boss everyone hopes to work for. He never raised his voice, and he never asked any personal questions like, "Hey, didn't you used to be a teacher in Michigan, and what are you doing in a joint like this?" If you did your job, that was enough. And even though he was the son of the founders and owners, Fritz and Fran Panther, he still did all of the grungiest work. One of the people I worked with was Pauline Ham, Dave's aunt, and Pat Hinkle, who many of you remember, Patty. Pictures of these people are in the book. That's one of the great things about this book. Seriously, Mary Beth. She went back and got pictures of people who used to work there that we all remember that have passed on. Patty started working there after graduating from high school in 57 and stayed until she retired in 97. They were dedicated, friendly, professional waitresses, and they were very patient with the new kid. I also worked with the legendary waitress Mickey, short and rotund, whose booming voice I can still hear as she approached me carrying plates of food while I was waiting on a customer in the cramped space behind the counter. "Behind you, coming in!" I was 32 years old when I started working there, and I was younger than all of those other folks who worked there, though just a few months younger than Dave. That's the big difference between the Burg then and now. The wait staff is much younger, and the customers are younger. It was more of a blue-collar place back then, and of course there's been a lot of modernization. Back then we only had booths and counter, no tables, and believe it or not, customers were not only allowed to smoke, but we sold cigarettes. And I do very vividly recall certain customers who sat all afternoon smoking Winston 100s and drinking Diet Pepsis, one right after the other. Along with the wait staff, there were cooks and dishwashers, some of whom are still around Iowa City. Robert DeBlois, Scotty Hayward, who has Mother Earth Majimba Band that you might hear from time to time. Jeffrey Morgan, who also plays music around town and is a social worker. And even though Robert McBrearty teaches in Colorado, teaches writing, he lives on at the Burg through his short story, The Dishwasher, which is in the book. And if any of you get a chance to see the reading we did at Prairie Lights, I hope you'll do it, because he read his story, The Dishwasher. And that is available on the PATV internet or on television. We were open until 1 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. And sometimes in the summer, when it took us a couple hours to clean up the place, we'd sit outside and drink a few beers and smoke a little bit, but never inhaling. Never, I promise, never inhaling. And we would wait for the sun to come up. What a time that was, really. Considering how many different types of people I waited on, it's remarkable that there was only one customer I didn't get along with. He was a really large man, about 60. He drove a beautiful 1956 green Buick. I'm from Detroit, so I know people by the cars they drive. And it was gorgeous. And he came in every night with his mother and sat in booth 5 and back. Back then, when customers ordered fried chicken, we had to take the pieces of raw chicken out of the back cooler, bread them, and put them in the fryer for 20 minutes. This guy ordered a chicken breast and a thigh every night. And every night he wanted me to bring out the raw breast and thigh for him to inspect before I put it in the fryer. He and his mother stayed for about 2 hours and kept me hopping with numerous requests for more water. And he always left me a very generous 25-cent tip. But 99% of my customers were great. One of my favorites was Stan Yoder Sr., a letter carrier who was always cheerful, even as he walked his rounds on the hottest days or the coldest days, whatever time of year. And his son, Stan Yoder Jr., has been my barber ever since I waited on his dad. I really had fun working there. One night, one of my regular customers, a grad student of some sort, complained about the small portion of mashed potatoes I'd given him with his roast beef special. So I took his plate back and scooped the largest mountain of mashed potatoes that could possibly fit on his plate and brought it out to him. We both laughed hysterically. Well, and maybe you've had to have been a waiter or waitress to understand how hysterically funny it was, but it was it truly was hysterical for us. If you could see, I wish I had a picture. We didn't have the cell phone camera things then, but if I could have a picture of that huge mountain of mashed potatoes on his plate, I would love to have it to this day. One customer changed my life. Lynn Feakin was the director of the University of Iowa Labor Center, and we had worked on a couple of labor and political projects together. One morning in August of 1980, as I served her the usual fried egg, juice, toast, and coffee, she said, "Hey, you were a teacher in Michigan, weren't you? Would you like to be a graduate assistant at the Labor Center?" And that was the job interview. Though I only worked at the Labor Center for 2 years, I started down the path I'm still on, with a few missteps, of course. It's mind-boggling when I contemplate my life in a parallel universe. If Dave hadn't hired me as a waiter, and if Lynn hadn't offered me a job that morning, Iowa City would not have become my home, which I love very much, except occasionally for days like this when it's 97 degrees and I can't just jump into Lake Michigan or the ocean. But even though we had a lot of fun in those days, there was also tragedy at the Hamburg. I only worked a few times with Dave's brother Mike before he was killed by a drunk driver on December 27th, 1985. He was a great guy. The plaque memorializing him is on the outside wall by the parking lot. Mike's death almost destroyed Dave, but he took a year off from the Burg and went to clown school, and that helped save him. He became Babaloon the Clown, which took him into an entirely different world, away from the Hamburg. He's still occasionally performing as Babaloon, and he's still one of the very few bosses that I have ever considered a friend. One other old Burg regular I have to mention is Carl Schlieder. Though he doesn't hang out there anymore, he was a regular in the early 90s. I had a political talk show back then on public access television, the Sanders Group, which was a takeoff on the McLaughlin Group, for any of you who go back that far. And shortly after Ronald Reagan came into the Burg in 1992, one of the staff at the Hamburg told me that while Carl was drinking his coffee, he refused to shake Reagan's hand when the former president walked down the counter greeting everyone. I didn't know Carl, but I tracked him down, and he explained, "I just didn't want to shake the SOB's hand. He was a liar and a terrible president." So that week at the end of my TV show, I announced it was Carl Schlieder Day in Iowa City. We became friends, and I introduced him to a small-time bookie who also hung out at the Burg. Sorry, Dave. And then Carl and I spent a few Sunday afternoons watching college football and jumping up and down, trying to get the teams we'd bet on to come through for us. I haven't seen Carl since the feds busted the gambling operation, but I still admire him for not shaking Reagan's hand. I missed Reagan's visit, but I did get to meet Bill Clinton at the Burg. It was a morning in November 2007, about 6 weeks before the caucus, where Hillary, of course, was running. I sat down at the counter for a cup of coffee, and there weren't too many other customers. I looked at the table about 10 feet across from me, and there was Bill Clinton with 4 advisors surrounding him. There was no media or crowds of people, so I realized this wasn't a scheduled campaign stop for Hillary. He had probably just decided to come in and get a great breakfast. I drank my coffee and tried to eavesdrop on their conversation. At one point, I heard Clinton saying something about the Arkansas football team, and I raised my voice just loud enough to be heard and said, "Wasn't that triple overtime loss to Mississippi State last Saturday night a heartbreaker?" Clinton got up with a surprised look on his face, and he came over to me. And I stood up, and he was a lot taller than I'd expected. He came over, and we talked a little college football. Absolutely no mention of politics. I asked one of the Hamburg Inn staff to take our picture, and when Bill Clinton put his arm around my shoulders, I felt that overwhelming personal magnetism that people have noted for years. And the truth is, hell, I would have gone to bed with him right then and there if he'd asked me to. It's hard to believe that it's been 33 years, half of my life and a little more than half of the Hamburg's life since I started working there. As I mentioned, the Press Citizen column was in 1990, and I was worried in that column about how the remodeling might ruin it. But the remodeling, which has continued occasionally for 20 years, hasn't ruined it. It has a little different feel to it than when I worked there, but it's still a great place to eat and hang out. It's still a restaurant with a soul. The Panther family and all the people who have worked and eaten there since 1948 have created a place that captures the spirit of Iowa City, and I just hope I'm here to celebrate the Burg's 80th anniversary in 2028. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce the man responsible for the whole thing, Dave Panther.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out, and especially Mary Beth and Gary. I, too, was overwhelmed by the book that Mary Beth has put together. And she's done such a marvelous job with it, and Gary has done such a marvelous job of promoting it. It's a real tribute to my mom and dad and my uncle Adrian and my Uncle Joe, who started it all back in the it was 1935 when they started downtown on Iowa Avenue, and my dad started in 1948. So I just wish that they could be here to see what it's come to be, and not just a local restaurant, but a national, international presence, especially with our coffee bean caucus, which I call the gift that keeps giving. So I want to thank everyone here for being part of this. I put mine as my earliest memories here. My earliest memories of Hamburg Inn are from living in the apartment above the restaurant. It was mostly the noises and smells, the clatter and clinking of plates and silverware, the occasional loud laughter or talking, the constant humming of the grill exhaust fan, with cooking smells of burgers and bacon, the constant opening of the front and back doors for customers and deliveries. There was an outside porch and stairway on the back of the building that Dad and Mom would use, and Dad always smelled like French fries. He was always up by 4 a.m., and I would sometimes wander into the bathroom while he was shaving when I just could not hold the pee in any longer. He would go down and start the grills and begin making chili, French fries, and American fries for the start of the day. Dad always felt like he needed to be on the grill when it was busy, and he was very good at greeting and talking to his guests. Hamburg Inn Dad really had a passion for his business. On Sunday, Hamburg Inn did not open until 4 p.m., so all of us kids would have little jobs to do on Sunday mornings, stocking the pop cooler with bottles, the refrigerator with small cartons of milk, assorted small cleaning jobs. Eventually, we would work part-time doing dishes before and after school. My brothers and I were among the few of our fellow friends who had jobs at a very early age to earn spending money, a gift that we both loved and cursed as we grew up. One of my jobs as I got older and bigger was making all the French fries for Hamburg Inn, 1, 2, and Big Tin Inn. We had a production set up in the basement, and I would peel 400 to 500 pounds of potatoes at a time for French fries. We would pre-cook the fries for about 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the water content of the potatoes, so that when they were ordered, it would not take so long to cook. At that time, the fries or the potatoes were delivered in 100-pound bags, and that was probably about 3 pounds more than I weighed at the time. And occasionally, you'd reach into the bag and put your finger right into a rotten potato. And the smell was incredible, I'll tell you. Dad always used fresh ground burger, which we eventually started grinding ourselves when Dad hired Otto Dolezal. The burger at the time was 1/4 pound and hand-rolled into burger balls that we flattened on the grill. Dad bought a patty maker one year and used it for 2 days. Before he sent it back, he felt it changed the texture and the taste of the burgers. When Hamburg Inn opened, everything was in the same room. The grills, the fryers, the steam tables, the dish machine were all on the back wall. There was a 12-stool counter and 5 booths. That was the layout until 1990, when we remodeled. The menu was small with daily specials, and on weekends, before the fast food trend, we had set up an extra grill in the back room to handle the carry-out orders. Graff Beverage was located where the Hamburg Inn parking lot is now along the alley. The Graff family also owned the Hamburg Inn building, and Dad was able to buy it from them in the early 70s. We sold Graff Pop. Every week they would run different flavors like cream soda, black cherry, and root beer. It's kind of interesting that Graff Beverage is kind of coming back now, not as Graff Beverage, but these little soda companies are back. We would always look forward to the delivery to see what new flavors would be in order. Our delivery man's name was Howard, and he always had a smile, the local gossip, and the need of some deodorant. And he really did need it. Howard eventually worked for my dad and uncle when Graff Beverage closed. Bill Driscoll was our bread delivery man for over 20 years. He took great pride in his job and always made sure that we were well supplied. He also had a great respect and friendship with my mom and dad. There were many ladies over the years who supervised the Hamburg Inn at night, and many had all their children working here part-time through high school. Arlene Ellis, Helen Hans, Agnes Loney are just a few. Dad called them jewels for being such great people and staff. Hamburg Inn has always been successful because of the great people who have worked here to make it so. Hamburg Inn building was heated by a coal furnace for years, and as kids we were always fascinated by it. I enjoyed stoking the coal hopper, removing the clinkers from the furnace. They would come out red hot and glowing and look like something from a volcano when they cooled. We used to shut down for a couple days after Christmas for deep cleaning of everything, and I always remembered it was 2 or 3 days of chaos with the grills and fryers and exhaust systems torn apart for cleaning and maintenance. I remember the chicken pressure fryer was as being a nightmare to take apart and put back together. Obviously, whoever engineered it never had to clean it. One of these cleaning adventures, I decided to replace the entryway flooring and tile myself. This turned into a never-ending battle because of my lack of handyman ability. We ended up being closed for an extra day. When I thought I was finished, I went to lock the front door and the door fell off the hinges. That floor did last for 10 years, and it probably cost me $10,000. I joined Dad in 1975 after I got out of the Air Force and managed Hamburg Inn until 1979. As Dad started to take more time and travel away from a restaurant, in 1979 he was ready to sell, and we worked out a buy-sell plan or buyout plan, and Dad would stop in to do small jobs when he felt like it. In 1981, my brother Mike joined me and eventually became my partner. Mike was a great addition, and Mike was a great addition, and he was much more outgoing than I was, so he related both well to the guests and staff. But bad stuff happens to us, and Mike was killed by a drunk driver in December of 1985. It's taken a long time to bury the sadness, and if I think about it for too long, it all comes back. So I remember Mike well, and I wish he could be here to see what it's all turned out to be also. You know, and there's just so many people that I need to thank for over the years. I mentioned some of the ladies that supervised at night, and there's several that I didn't mention. Lydia Pruce was this great lady that worked the grill during the 11 to 7 shift for years and years. There's just so many people that have helped Hamburg Inn become what it is. I remember a lot of student projects, too. We got picketed by the egg people one day. A bunch of people out on the sidewalk dressed like eggs, which we thought was funny until they started throwing eggs at the building. And then I had another guy one day that he didn't think he was getting his coffee refilled enough, so he stood up on the counter. So I came up with the coffee pot and says, "Oh, I don't remember you as being that tall," and filled his cup. But it's been great, and I want to thank my wife Roma for being such a great partner in it all too, and my brothers. We've all worked there, and it's all been like I say, a blessing and a cursed experience for most of us. We all lived up above the restaurant at one time or another, and it's just been a great experience. I remember that Steve and I got into some real trouble when we were like 2 or 3 because we were throwing our toy cars out the window when we lived in the apartment. Unfortunately, somebody's brand new 1950 Chevy was sitting in the alley down below, and he got a little upset about it. But again, I want to thank everyone for coming, and especially Mary Beth and Gary for putting it all together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I hope to talk to some of you downstairs.